So everybody's trying to get the king to marry a 12-year-old. Well, that escalated quickly. This episode picks up 6 months after the death of Queen Emma and Prince Balon. As Corlys explained to Small Council in the first episode, pirates have taken over part of Essos and are executing people by feeding them their crabs. He warned the King's Council that this would get out of hand, and now it has. The pirates have attacked his ships. The exchange is awesome because it shows how cocky Corlys is. He really wants to be king, and he acts like he's Viserys' equal, or really his better, and makes no attempt to hide it. When the others point out that the pirates are likely being helped by the free cities, so attacking the pirates will lead to war, Corlys uses that as an excuse to bring up what Daemon's been up to for the last 6 months, namely taking over Dragonstone. Viserys plans to send ships to deal with the situation, but Rhaenyra, who's been standing there serving as the cupbearer, suggests to use dragon riders instead. She then gets her first whiff of what people actually think of her when they, including her father, reject her idea. It's not because it's wrong, but seemingly because it came from a girl. Only Corlys thinks it's a good idea, which worsens the situation. Otto suggests giving her something else to do, so Viserys sends Rhaenyra away to handle choosing a new knight for the King's Guard, which makes a little sense considering that Rhaenyra is Viserys' heir and should be taught how to rule. It just goes to show that Rhaenyra is heir in name but not in practice. Of course, Otto's plan to get rid of her doesn't go as well as he hoped. All the knights they present won tourneys but haven't seen actual combat, except for one, Criston Cole. And Rhaenyra is totally smitten with him, so of course, she picks him. Otto starts to go on and on about powerful houses and playing politics, and Rhaenyra's like, look, my father is king. Don't you think his guards should have been in real fights? And Otto's standing there like, okay, I'll give you that one. Now, Otto is a man who looks like he holds grudges, so this wasn't the smartest thing to do, but wait, because the burn gets much worse later in the episode. Meanwhile, he's got his daughter Alicent shacking up with the king. The intent is obvious. With the queen dead and a new queen and male heir needed, if Alicent woos Viserys, then maybe he'll choose her as his bride. That Otto was conniving enough to do this just hours after the queen's death tells you what type of man he is. Anyway, Viserys shows Alicent his model of the Valyrian capital, and ends up breaking one of the dragon gargoyles. Viserys has completely fallen for Otto's plan, leaning emotionally on Alicent. However, Alicent doesn't seem to be a willing participant. She's doing what her father wants, but it's clear that she doesn't like manipulating the king. This seems to be different from the book version, where Alicent originally played this role for King Jaehaerys as his health failed, and it was Viserys who sought out Alicent, not the other way around. Also, she's younger in the show, 15, just like Rhaenyra, instead of being 18 like in the books. He then asks Alicent about Rhaenyra, since he and his daughter haven't talked much since Emma's death. Viserys asks Alicent to keep their talk secret from Rhaenyra. Later, she and Rhaenyra share a moment in the sept, and we get to see the toll keeping secrets is having on her. Then we get to the creepiest part of the episode, where Princess Rhaenys and her husband Matt Gaetz decide to pimp out their 12-year-old daughter Laena. They start with this pretense about protecting the realm from enemies, like the pirates in Essos, and shoring up support among powerful houses, but it's really all about them getting closer to the Iron Throne, this time by having a 40-something Viserys marry their preteen daughter. To his credit, Viserys is totally put off by this, not just because he's still suffering over his wife's death, but also because he doesn't like the idea of marrying a child, and seems to be the only one who thinks there's something odd about it. I guess Westeros is Valyrian for Tennessee. Then he and Rhaenyra have the world's most awkward dinner where neither of them can talk freely about losing Emma, and when Rhaenyra tries to bring up what happened at the small council, Viserys cuts her off, further proving to her, as she mentioned to Alicent at the sept, that no one really thinks of her as a true heir. Now, in the first episode, we saw that Viserys has a nasty wound on his back from the Iron Throne, and then he cut his finger on the throne when he banished Daemon. 6 months later, the finger has gone gangrenous, so the maesters have him put his hand in a dish of maggots to try to eat away the rotten flesh. While this happens, Viserys speaks with Otto Hightower about his exchange with Corlys and Rhaenys, and them wanting him to marry their 12-year-old daughter. Otto obviously doesn't like it, because he's positioning Alicent for that role, but the Grand Maester is all for it, because politics and such. So, Viserys gives it a go. He meets with his little cousin, and they have a talk about the great dragons, Balerion, who had died at the start of Viserys' reign, and Vhagar, the last of the dragons from the Conquest, who is apparently nesting elsewhere because she's too big for the pit. But all of that was a pretense, as Laena just flat out says she'd make a good wife. Viserys sees through this, though, and asks if that's what her father told her to say, which she confirms, and then asks what her mother told her, To which the 12-year-old girl says that it was that she wouldn't have to bet the king until she was 14. And again, Viserys is like, Jesus, I know we're in the South, but come on. Granted, this is what medieval court was like. Marriages were political. They were all about power, so it was very common for the power players to marry off their kids, their daughters, and their sons, regardless of age, if it could get or maintain power. It's just that by modern standards, well, let me correct that, some modern standards, it's gross. Rhaenyra watches as this goes down and then bumps into Rhaenys, who decides to start a verbal sparring match. Basically, she tells the girl, you've got a vagina, they'll never accept you. And Rhaenyra's like, they bent the knee to me, they just didn't like you. And then Rhaenys goes, well, do remind the men of the council of that when you're carrying their cups. This is what I've missed. The banter. The cutting banter. It's like a breath of fresh air over the nonsense about respecting pronouns and representation, which is ironic, because you're getting that in this scene. Two women just going at it, and it's glorious because neither of them will back down. You didn't have to turn them into pseudo-men to make this work. You set up their conflict, that Rhaenys is jealous of Rhaenyra and trying to undermine her confidence by telling the girl that no one will support her being on the Iron Throne, so that should they continue to be enemies, there might be a dragon fight later on, because both of them have dragons. See how that works? You can let them behave as women would have behaved in medieval Europe, add in them having dragons, and the fight writes itself. Really not that hard. Anyway, Viserys goes to hang out with Alicent, and she gives him a gift, a repaired dragon, the one he'd previously dropped. They have a little moment, and it seems like he's actually starting to fall for 15-year-old Alicent, when Otto comes in saying that he's called a small council because there's a problem. Daemon stole one of the dragon eggs, still names himself the heir to the Iron Throne, and plans on taking the second wife, Mysaria, the prostitute from the previous episode, who is apparently with child. The council is like, well, this is bad. But Viserys really doesn't want to do anything because it's his brother, until Rhaenyra asks which egg Daemon took. It turns out it was Dreamfire, the egg that was intended for her now dead brother. That gets Viserys hot and bothered, but Otto stops him from leaving because Daemon would probably kill him. Otto decides to go instead. So he goes, and you just have to give it up to Matt Smith in the scene because he left no piece of the scene unchewed. Daemon has not been able to find nary a fuck in the whole of the realm to give to Otto. He just doesn't care. Otto is like, dude, what are you doing? And Daemon's like, I'm getting married in the style of my house. To a whore? Our love does not know titles or traditions. He just couldn't care less. Otto says this will start a war, and Daemon's like, fine, let's go. But then Otto crosses the line. He says that Lady Mysaria and her child will die, so Daemon draws his sword, and so does everyone else, except they all forgot he's got a dragon. Caraxes shows up, and Otto goes, sheathe the fucking steel. The best line in the entire episode. So now they're screwed. But then there's a dragon screech. And at first I thought maybe Daemon found Vhagar, since no one knows where she is. But no, it's Rhaenyra. She shows up on Syrax, lands, and Otto immediately calls her out and tells Criston Cole to take her back to safety. And she's like, be careful of Syrax. She's very protective of me. And then just punks her uncle. She tells him that he's in her house, because she's the heir, so Dragonstone belongs to her. Then Daemon says some nonsense about him getting married, and she's like, you've already got a wife. She's not intimidated by this dude at all. Daemon says that he took the egg for his kid, and Rhaenyra doesn't buy it, so Daemon admits Mysaria isn't pregnant, and that makes Mysaria leave now that she's seen Daemon's game. Finally, Rhaenyra goes, I'm right here, uncle. If you want the throne, you're gonna have to kill me. But we all know that Daemon's not gonna kill her. Look at them bedroom eyes he's making at his 15-year-old niece. Jesus Christ. So he backs off and tosses Rhaenyra the egg. She puts it in the hot pot and then gives us the best moment in the episode. That glorious side-eye at Otto. Not a word said, but in her mind she's saying, don't worry, I'll give you your balls back when I'm done roasting them. They're small. It won't take long. And he doesn't say it, but you could tell Otto is thinking, touché. Of course, this is a man who holds a grudge, so Rhaenyra's going to pay for that sooner or later. Meanwhile, Daemon goes to talk with Mysaria, who checks him on using her as a pawn. He's a Targaryen. He can play these games and probably walk away, but these people will take her life. It's hard to tell in the scene if Daemon knows or even cares about this, because we've only had a few scenes with them together, and it's not really clear whether he actually cares for her, which leaves this moment a little weak. If it is the case that he doesn't care about her, then that just shows how devious this dude is. Back at King's Landing, Viserys talks with Lionel Strong, his master of laws, about what to do about his marriage. Like the others, Lionel says Viserys should marry Laena. When Viserys says that she's 12, Lionel goes, well, she'll come of age. It's scummy, but it's all being done because Corlys is apparently the most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms, so crossing him wouldn't be a good idea. As Viserys tries to decide, he gets notice that Rhaenyra is back. He meets her and chews her out for leaving without permission, since she's his heir, and it finally becomes clear to him that people are moving against him and his family. He's not Ned Stark level oblivious to what's going on around him, but in a way he's worse because when he does act, it's too late. Whatever's been planned is already set in motion, so at best he can only delay it. And that's what happens here. He and Rhaenyra finally have their heart-to-heart, and he admits that he's not past Emma's death, and then she agrees to him marrying again, for the sake of the kingdom. The next morning at the small council, he announces to all of them that he will marry Alicent Hightower. Corlys damn near pops his dreads, while Otto looks at him like, I'd call it throwing shade, but you're already pretty dark. Then Viserys looks at Rhaenyra, who's just glaring down Alicent, and then she leaves and he's shocked and it's like, dude, what did you expect? That's your daughter's, excuse me, let me correct that. That's your 15-year-old daughter's 15-year-old best friend. Did you really think she'd be cool with it? Or does this mean she wanted you to shack up with her 12-year-old cousin? And because no one in the scene said it, I'm gonna say it. You do realize the extra 3 years doesn't make this any better, right? It's less bad than before, but still bad and confusing because in the books, Alicent is 18 when she marries Viserys. Seems like a weird, unnecessary change to make, but I didn't write the show. Anyway, the episode ends with Corlys trying to form an alliance with Daemon, 1, to stop the pirates in Essos who threatened Corlys' power, and 2, to pay back Viserys for the slight of refusing to marry his daughter. All in all, I'd say this was a solid episode. I forgot TV shows could be this good, and it seems like they're just getting started. The preview for the next episode had older versions of Laenor and Laena, so they're probably going to do a massive time jump, at least a couple of years. However, this does bring up a question of whether this is going to be a limited series. I looked at the titles of the upcoming episodes, and from what I've learned about the lore, thanks to talking to a friend who I forgot was obsessed with the Targaryens, it seems like they're blazing through the story. Maybe this might be a 2 or 3 season show. I don't think that would be a bad thing. There's no reason to draw things out if they don't have to. However, I could see HBO deciding to continue the show to tell the entire Targaryen story up to the start of Game of Thrones. That would give them many more seasons. It just depends on how well the show does. Now, like I said in my previous video, the bar has been set and now raised, Amazon. Can you bring it? Stop laughing. They could do it. It's possible the Rings of Power will be the greatest TV show ever. I can't even say it with a straight face. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.